First, let's speak to Bob Seeley, the Conservative MP for the Isle of Wight and member of the Commons Foreign Affairs Committee. Good morning to you.
Good morning to your listeners.
What did you make of the tone and tenor of that speech by Rishi Sunak? Is he trying to be all things to all people, or did you think that was striking the right line?
No, I think the Prime Minister is undoubtedly trying to strike the right line, and it is a fine line to be striking. However, I do have sympathy with what Ian says, and I do think we need to be robust but realistic. So it slightly depends what the Prime Minister's words mean, but I do think he's on the right lines. There are a couple of big global trends happening at the moment. Profoundly, power is flowing back to the east. After 200 years of Western domination. How much power and how fast it flows is up to us to decide. The other great point is that authoritarian states, Iran, Russia, China, all of them are in crisis, but at the same time, all of them are using the power of artificial intelligence and big data to destroy dissent within. And which is going to win out in the end is impossible to say at the moment.
I mean, the issue with appeasement is an interesting word, because appeasement implies there's two courses of action. One is to sort of acquiesce to the might of China, and one is to stand up to it. But is that actually a real distinction in reality, bearing in mind the comparative size of the two countries?
I think rather than talk about the UK's relationship with China, I think we need to talk more broadly, if you don't mind, about the West's relationship with China. And I think that is a more realistic proposition. What worries me fundamentally is that we have allowed ourselves to become increasingly economically dependent on China at the same time that China, through its Made in China policy, is trying to become more economically self-sufficient. This is for one reason and one reason only, that in the next 10 years, China can force the United States out of the Pacific Rim, or the bit that China thinks it wishes to dominate, and to reincorporate, either militarily or not, Taiwan. Because what it will say to the rest of the world is that if you put sanctions on us once we invade Taiwan, you will destroy your economies. You will destroy your living standards, because we can survive because we are self-sufficient, where you are dependent on us. And that is the big strategic issue that we face, because we should be under no illusion. China uses trade for power in a way that we don't. And naively, we don't really quite understand either.
And that's the problem when you want to talk about the West as a whole, but we are still a sovereign nation. We have to consider our own economy. We like cheap things in this country, and we don't make many things in this country. And even if we did make things, we want to pay people a living wage, so we can't make them that cheaply. So for almost our economy is founded on actually more imports than exports, and importing things made cheaply in other countries. That's just the reality, isn't it? And so I guess the question is, what follows from that? Do we start trying to put tariffs on Chinese goods? What action do we take?
I think that's okay. You make a really valuable point. I would say a couple of things. Firstly, when we talk about going green, if we're serious about that, we need to be onshoring more of our dirty industries rather than exporting them to places like China, which have lower environmental standards. Secondly, the whole range of Western states have become, as I said, economically dependent. But where there's a will, there's a way. And if we understand our economic dependency and try to find alternatives, then we can slowly, over a period of years, wean ourselves off China economically as we diversify supply lines to Taiwan, to Bangladesh, to Vietnam, to other states as well. So the idea that there is no alternative, that we are either economically dependent or not, I don't buy. But it certainly takes political will. And the first step to that is understanding that. So, for example, last year, when we were talking about the National Investment Security Bill, some of us said we need a definition of national security and we want an annual statement of economic dependency. Unfortunately, the government didn't agree it. I wish it had. So there are things that we can be doing.
Interesting stuff, Bob. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
That's Bob Seeley, the Conservative MP for the Isle of Wight, member of the Commons Foreign Affairs Committee.